The photograph sits in a weathered manila folder, nearly forgotten among thousands of others in the university archives. The basement storage room is silent except for the gentle hum of climate control systems, their steady drone maintaining the precise temperature and humidity required to preserve these fragments of history. Professor Eleanor Harlow's gloved fingers carefully lift the photograph from its resting place, cradling the edges with practiced precision, honed from years of handling delicate historical artifacts. She holds it to the light filtering through the narrow basement window where dust motes dance in the pale sunbeam that illuminates the image. A group of children, 23 in all, stare back at her from across time. Their faces, frozen in that peculiar Victorian stillness required by the long exposure times of 1899 photography, seem to follow her movements. They wear the plain, functional clothing typical of institutional care in that era, girls in modest pinafores, boys in stiff collars and jackets that hang awkwardly on thin frames. Their expressions range from solemn resignation to wary defiance, the universal language of children who have learned that adults are not to be trusted. Yet something in their collective gaze seems unusually penetrating, as though they see through the camera, through time itself. "This is the one," she whispers to her research assistant, Marcus Reynolds, a doctoral candidate whose dissertation on Victorian child welfare institutions had caught her attention 3 years ago. The Blackwood Orphanage photograph. Marcus peers over her shoulder, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his tablet screen as he makes notes. The blue light reflects off his wire-rimmed glasses, momentarily obscuring his eyes. "It doesn't look particularly remarkable," he says, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Just another institutional photograph from the period. Standard composition, typical formal arrangement. Every orphanage and school had these taken, documenting their charges for annual reports and benefactor appeals." Eleanor's lips curve into a slight smile, the kind that suggests access to knowledge others have yet to discover. That's what everyone thought for over a century, but look at their eyes. She hands him a magnifying glass, its brass rim worn smooth from decades of scholarly use. "Really look, Marcus. There's something there that shouldn't be." The university's Department of Historical Anthropology had received a substantial grant to digitize and analyze thousands of archived photographs from the turn of the century. The project, funded by the Stevenson Foundation for Historical Preservation, aimed to create a comprehensive digital archive of institutional life in late Victorian America. Eleanor, a specialist in Victorian-era social institutions with 3 acclaimed books on the subject, had specifically requested this particular collection, focused on orphanages and children's homes across New England. These were the forgotten children, the anonymous faces of an era when childhood hardship was considered character-building rather than traumatic. Marcus adjusts the magnifying glass, focusing on each child in turn, squinting as he examines their features with growing concentration. His brow furrows as he moves methodically across the image, a portrait of academic diligence. "I don't see anything unusual," he admits after careful examination, a note of disappointment evident in his voice. "Just sad-looking kids in outdated clothes, though I suppose that's remarkable in itself. 23 distinct expressions of childhood resilience in the face of abandonment. Precisely why we need the imaging lab," Eleanor responds, carefully placing the photograph in an acid-free protective sleeve, handling it with the reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. The human eye can only perceive so much, especially after more than a century has degraded the emulsion. Modern technology might reveal what generations have missed. She taps the protective sleeve thoughtfully. "History is full of overlooked details, Marcus. Sometimes the most important stories are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions." The archive room seems to grow darker as she speaks, as though the very air responds to her words. The lone sunbeam that had illuminated their work retreats as clouds pass outside, leaving them in the blue-tinged glow of institutional lighting that casts hollow shadows beneath their eyes. 2 days later, the photograph lies on a scanning bed in the university's Advanced Imaging Laboratory. The lab occupies what was once a chemistry department storeroom, repurposed with state-of-the-art equipment acquired through a series of competitive grants Eleanor had fought 3 years to secure. The walls are lined with monitors displaying various analyses in progress: spectral mapping of medieval manuscripts, 3D modeling of deteriorating daguerreotypes, infrared penetration of painted-over canvases. Each screen shows history revealing its secrets under the scrutiny of modern technology. Dr. Eliza Chen, head of digital restoration and analysis, and one of the few people Eleanor considers both a colleague and friend, works methodically at her computer terminal. Her fingers move across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, each keystroke deliberate and precise. Her background in quantum physics before transitioning to historical imaging gives her a unique perspective on the intersection of past and present, of observation and reality. Eleanor and Marcus watch from nearby chairs, the antiseptic white of the laboratory, a stark contrast to the dusty warmth of the archives. We'll start with a basic ultra-high-resolution scan at 9600 dpi, Dr. Chen explains, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Shanghai childhood. She pushes a strand of hair behind her ear as she calibrates the equipment. Then we'll move through various spectral analyses, ultraviolet, infrared, X-ray fluorescence, hyperspectral imaging. If there's anything hidden in this image, writing, marks, alterations, chemical anomalies, we'll find it. Photographic plates from this period often captured more than the photographer intended. She glances at Eleanor with a knowing look, though I still don't understand why this particular photograph warrants priority analysis. Eleanor leans forward, her usually composed academic demeanor betraying a hint of eagerness. Trust me, Eliza, there's something about these children. I've studied thousands of institutional photographs from this period. This one is different. I can feel it. Dr. Chen raises an eyebrow but doesn't comment further. In their 15 years of collaboration, she's learned to trust Eleanor's academic intuition. The laboratory fills with the soft hum of equipment as the scan commences, a mechanical whisper punctuated by the occasional beep of calibration. On the monitor, the image appears gradually, emerging like a developing photograph in a darkroom, revealing details invisible to the naked eye, individual threads in woolen clothing, minute expressions captured in milliseconds, imperfections in the photographic plate, the barely perceptible tension in small hands clasped too tightly. Can you tell us about the orphanage while we wait? Dr. Chen asks, making minute adjustments to the equipment with the precision of someone accustomed to coaxing secrets from reluctant sources. The scanning process would take nearly 40 minutes for a complete spectral analysis, time enough for context to be established. Eleanor nods, her academic passion evident as she slips easily into lecture mode. The story of Blackwood is one she's researched extensively, tracing its history through fragmentary records, newspaper archives, and the scattered remnants of institutional documentation that survived the passage of time. Blackwood Orphanage operated from 1878 to 1904 in rural Massachusetts, about 15 miles outside of Boston. She begins, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone accustomed to classroom presentations. It was founded by Margaret Blackwood, a widow who converted her late husband's country estate into an institution for what period documents called unfortunate children without natural protectors. Like many institutions of that era, it was funded partially by industrial benefactors, textile manufacturers primarily, looking to cultivate future workers, and partially by municipal authorities eager to address the growing problem of urban child poverty without spending significant public funds. She pauses as Marcus brings up historical photographs of the orphanage on his tablet, a grand Victorian mansion with Gothic revival elements, its windows like dark eyes watching over the surrounding countryside, its grounds enclosed by a wrought iron fence whose spikes seem designed less to keep intruders out than to keep occupants in. Children there were typically taught practical trades suitable for their presumed station in life, manufacturing skills for boys, domestic service for girls. Their education was minimal, focused on basic literacy, rudimentary arithmetic, and what contemporary documents describe as moral improvement, usually a euphemism for religious indoctrination and the inculcation of obedience. Her voice carries a hint of the righteous indignation that had initially drawn her to studying these forgotten children. The scanner completes its first pass, and Dr. Chen magnifies sections of the image, focusing on the faces of the children as she adjusts parameters for the next scan. The enlarged images reveal eyes that seem too knowing for their young faces, gazes that hold something beyond the expected fear or resignation of institutional children. The photograph is dated September 16, 1899. Eleanor continues, consulting her notes with scholarly precision. What makes this particular image noteworthy is that approximately 3 months after it was taken, the orphanage reported that 6 of these children had gone missing. A subsequent investigation by local authorities yielded no results, and the case was eventually abandoned. Not particularly unusual for that period when children, especially orphans, disappeared with alarming regularity. Marcus leans forward, his interest visibly piqued. Which ones disappeared? Eleanor points to 6 children clustered on the left side of the group, 3 boys and 3 girls standing slightly apart from the others, their arrangement subtly different in ways difficult to articulate. These ones here, 3 boys, 3 girls, ages 8 to 12. Their names are recorded in the orphanage's register as Thomas Winters, Robert Finch, Samuel Preston, Emily Marsh, Catherine Shaw, and Sarah Collins. The investigation file notes they were last seen at evening prayers on December 21st, 1899, the winter solstice. Her finger taps thoughtfully on the image of the smallest girl, whose expression seems both defiant and afraid, a contradiction captured in silver halide crystals. What makes their disappearance particularly unusual is that there was no sign of forced entry, no indications of struggle, and the orphanage was located in an isolated area during the New England winter. Where could 6 children go, in the dead of night, in freezing temperatures, without leaving a trace? Dr. Chen nods thoughtfully, continuing her work with methodical precision. I'm running enhancement algorithms now and preparing for infrared analysis. Let's see what emerges from the emulsion that the original photographer couldn't see. On screen, the image grows sharper as computational algorithms strip away the degradation of time. The children's faces become more distinct, solemn expressions, wary eyes that seem to hold secrets no child should possess. The tall, severe woman standing behind them, presumably Margaret Blackwood, the matron, clutches a leather-bound book in rigid hands, her posture radiating authority and something less definable, a tension that seems to affect the very atmosphere of the photograph. Wait, Dr. Chen says suddenly, her voice tight with professional excitement. She zooms in on the background, a section of wall barely visible behind the group, previously lost in the shadows of the original print. There's something here. The 3 lean closer to the screen, academic curiosity drawing them in like moths to a flame. In the enhanced image, what appeared to be an ordinary wall in the original photograph now reveals faint markings, symbols etched into the plaster, nearly invisible to conventional viewing. They form a pattern that seems deliberate, a series of interconnected geometric shapes that prickle at the edge of recognition without resolving into anything immediately identifiable. Can you sharpen that section? Eleanor asks, her academic curiosity fully engaged, the thrill of discovery evident in her voice. This was why she had pursued history, this moment when the past reached out across time with tantalizing fragments of forgotten narratives. Dr. Chen's fingers move across her keyboard with practiced efficiency. I'm applying a contrast filter and removing photographic grain. The symbols gradually become clearer, a series of unusual geometric shapes arranged in what appears to be a deliberate pattern, their edges too precise to be dismissed as random damage or architectural elements. I'm also running these through our symbol recognition database to check for matches in known historical contexts. Those aren't standard architectural elements, Marcus observes, his training in historical architecture evident in his confident assessment. They look almost like ritual markings, Eleanor finishes, her voice hushed with the weight of realization, similar to those found in certain obscure folk practices of the period. She reaches for her tablet, quickly searching through her extensive digital library of reference materials. There were numerous esoteric movements operating in New England during this period, many of them splinters from established religious traditions or syncretic combinations of imported European mysticism and local folk practices. Dr. Chen enlarges another section of the photograph, focusing on the children who would later vanish. The enhanced image reveals subtle details previously invisible. There's more. Look at the children's hands. The 6 children who would later vanish are standing slightly differently from the others. While most have their hands folded before them in the conventional pose required by Victorian photography, these 6 each have their right hand positioned with the first 2 fingers extended against their thighs, almost imperceptible without digital enhancement, but unmistakable once observed. That's not a typical Victorian pose for formal photography, Eleanor murmurs, her historian's mind rapidly cataloging possible explanations. It looks deliberate, a signal of some kind. Marcus pulls out his tablet, searching through reference materials with the speed of digital natives. Could it be a sign language element? Some orphanages taught rudimentary signing for maintaining silence during services or work periods. Perhaps, Eleanor responds, unconvinced. But why only these 6 children? And why position themselves identically unless instructed to do so? What message were they conveying? And to whom? Dr. Chen continues her analysis, applying various filters and enhancement techniques that strip away layers of time to reveal what once was hidden. I'm going to check for any hidden writing or marks on their clothing or skin that might not be visible in conventional light. She adjusts several parameters, creating a false color image that highlights different chemical compositions in the photographic emulsion. Suddenly she pauses, her expression shifting from professional concentration to something closer to unease. There's something unusual about the matron's book. She zooms in on the volume clasped in the woman's hands. What appeared to be a standard Bible in the original photograph now reveals subtle differences under enhanced scrutiny. The binding pattern doesn't match typical religious texts of the period, and faint markings are visible along its edges, similar to those found on the wall, but smaller, more intricate. That's not a standard Bible, Eleanor confirms, her expertise in Victorian artifacts evident in her confident assessment. The dimensions and binding are wrong for both the King James and the Douay-Rheims versions commonly used in American institutions of this period. And look at the clasp. That's silver, not the brass that would be typical of institutional religious texts. Dr. Chen enhances the image further, revealing a small symbol embossed on the cover, a circle containing what appears to be a stylized eye, its pupil formed by an unusual geometric shape. "I've seen this before," Eleanor says, her voice dropping to a whisper, the excitement of academic discovery mingling with something darker. "In my research on marginalized religious movements of the late 19th century, this symbol was associated with a group called the Vigilant Order." Marcus looks up from his tablet, his brow furrowed in scholarly confusion. "I'm not finding any references to them in the standard historical databases or religious encyclopedias." His fingers move rapidly across the screen, searching through the digital archives that had revolutionized historical research in the past decade. "Nothing in the Compendium of American Religious Movements. Nothing in Thornton's Encyclopedia of Esoteric Societies. It's as if they've been systematically erased from conventional historical records. You wouldn't find them there," Eleanor replies, her voice carrying the weight of specialized knowledge acquired through years of archival immersion. She pulls up a file on her tablet, displaying photographed pages from a leather-bound journal, its handwritten text faded but legible. "This is from the personal papers of Reverend Isaiah Thornfield, a Boston minister who documented what he called spiritual aberrations in New England from 1870 to 1910. His collection was considered too speculative for academic preservation until recently." She scrolls to a particular entry, dated 1894. The Vigilant Order was deliberately obscure, existing on the fringes of documented history. They cultivated anonymity, operating through seemingly respectable proxies while maintaining their core rituals in absolute secrecy. She enlarges the relevant passage, reading aloud. "Those who call themselves watchers believe themselves possessed of a sacred duty to observe what lies beyond mortal perception. They speak of veils between worlds, of ancient beings who regard humanity with unfathomable interest, of chosen individuals who serve as bridges between realms of existence. Their practices combine elements of Hermetic tradition with significantly darker innovations that border on the blasphemous." Eleanor looks up, her expression grave. Thornfield describes their core belief as centered around the concept of watchers, individuals who could perceive beyond ordinary reality, beyond the limitations of conventional human senses. Dr. Chen has moved to examining the children's faces more closely, applying different spectral analyses that reveal aspects of the photographic emulsion invisible to conventional viewing. There's something else. Look at their pupils. On screen, the enhanced image shows that the 6 children who would later disappear have subtly different pupil dilation compared to the others. While most have the constricted pupils typical of outdoor photography in daylight, these 6 show unusually expanded pupils, despite standing in the same light conditions as their peers. "Could be a photographic anomaly," Marcus suggests, though his tone betrays his skepticism. "Perhaps a quirk in how the emulsion captured these particular subjects. Across all 6, positioned identically in the composition? That's statistically improbable," Dr. Chen counters, her scientific training evident in her assessment. "The probability of identical anomalies affecting only these specific subjects while sparing all others would be astronomically low." Eleanor stands abruptly, her academic excitement palpable as connections form in her mind. "We need to dig deeper. There must be more records about what happened to those children. She begins gathering her notes, her movements energized by the thrill of discovery. Marcus, I need you to search for any personal accounts from staff or other children at Blackwood during this period. Letters, diaries, anything that might provide first-hand observations. Eliza, can you run a complete analysis of this photograph and prepare a comprehensive report of all anomalies? I'm going to contact the Massachusetts State Archives to request access to the original investigation files on the disappearance. The laboratory seems to darken slightly as they make their plans, as though the very light is being absorbed by the mysteries emerging from the photograph. On the screen, the 6 children stare out with their dilated pupils, their gazes seeming to follow the researchers' movements across the room. 3 days later, the research team has expanded. Eleanor has brought in Dr. James Whitlock, a historian specializing in New England folklore and religious practices, whose salt and pepper beard and tweed jacket give him the appearance of a stereotypical academic, though his sharp eyes betray a mind that moves quickly between disparate facts to form unexpected connections. Also joining them is Sophia Reeves, an archival specialist from the Massachusetts Historical Society, whose family connections had granted her access to private collections normally closed to researchers. Her expertise in navigating the labyrinthine world of historical documentation had proved invaluable in tracking down obscure references and forgotten accounts. They gather in Eleanor's office, its walls lined with crowded bookshelves containing leather-bound volumes intermixed with modern academic publications. The scent of old paper mingles with coffee as they surround a large oak table now covered with documents, digital scans, printouts of enhanced photographs, and cups of cooling coffee. Outside, rain lashes against the windows, casting the room in a gray light that seems appropriate to their grim discoveries. The official record states that the children simply vanished overnight, Sophia explains, referencing a yellowed police report displayed on her screen. Her voice carries the measured precision of someone accustomed to presenting archival findings. The investigating officer, a Constable Frederick Merrill, interviewed all staff and remaining children. No signs of forced entry were documented. No evidence of struggle within the dormitories. The matron, Margaret Blackwood, claimed she checked on all children at 9 p.m., as was her custom, and by morning roll call at 6 a.m., 6 were missing. She scrolls through her notes, continuing. Merrill notes with some skepticism that none of the other 25 occupants of the building claimed to have heard anything unusual during the night, despite the fact that the children's dormitory was a shared space where the disappearance of 6 individuals should have created some disturbance. She looks up, her expression troubled. His final report suggests that staff collusion seems likely, though he could establish no motive for the removal of these specific children. The case was officially closed in February 1900, with a notation that the children were presumed deceased. Dr. Whitlock adjusts his glasses, examining a detailed map of the region from 1899 spread before him. His finger traces the winding roads and topographical features with practiced ease. The orphanage was remarkably isolated, even by the standards of the period, 10 miles to the nearest town of any significance, surrounded by dense woodland that extended nearly 30 miles to the north. He traces the outline of the forest with his finger, his nail making a soft scratching sound against the paper. Local folklore from that period contains numerous references to strange occurrences in those woods, lights observed between the trees, unusual sounds carrying on still nights, travelers reporting disorientation and missing time. Typical rural superstitions, Marcus suggests, though without conviction. Perhaps, Dr. Whitlock concedes. But what's interesting is the specificity and consistency of these accounts, and their concentration around the area nearest to the Blackwood property. He taps a notation on the map. This area was known locally as Whispering Hollow, a designation that appears in no official records but is consistently referenced in personal accounts from residents of the region. Eleanor taps the enhanced photograph on her monitor, bringing their attention back to the central mystery. We've identified the 6 missing children as Thomas Winters, age 12, Robert Finch, age 10, Samuel Preston, age 9, Emily Marsh, age 11, Catherine Shaw, age 10, and Sarah Collins, age 8. She displays individual enlargements of each child's face, their expressions now haunting in light of their fate. All were admitted to Blackwood between 1897 and 1898. All were described as of sound mind and body in their intake documentation. Marcus looks up from a stack of admission records he's been methodically reviewing, legal pads covered in his precise handwriting surrounding him like a scholarly nest. I've been tracking their backgrounds through cross-referencing admission forms with municipal records. Interestingly, none of them were surrendered by family members, which was unusual even for that period. He consults his notes, continuing. Most orphans in such institutions had at least one known relative who could no longer care for them due to economic hardship or parental death. But these 6 were all found abandoned. Thomas at a railway station in Boston, the others in various public locations throughout Massachusetts. Foundlings, Dr. Whitlock murmurs, the term carrying significant weight in his field of study, significant in folklore across numerous cultures. Children of unknown origin were often believed to possess unique qualities, to be changelings or blessed or cursed. The uncertainty of their lineage allowed for supernatural attribution. Dr. Chen enters the office, carrying her laptop with an air of contained excitement that immediately draws the attention of her colleagues. Her normally composed demeanor has given way to barely concealed academic enthusiasm. I've completed the full spectral analysis of the photograph. There's something everyone needs to see. She places her computer on the desk and pulls up an image. The same photograph, but processed through a specialized filter that reveals elements invisible to normal sight. In this version, rendered in false color to make the anomaly clearly visible, faint, luminous threads appear to connect the 6 missing children, like delicate filaments of light emanating from their chests and intertwining in a complex pattern before fading into the background of the image. The threads glow with an unnatural blue-white luminescence against the sepia-toned background of the original photograph. This isn't digital artifacting or processing error, Dr. Chen states firmly, anticipating the obvious question. I've verified using 3 separate analytical methods and different software packages. These patterns are consistently present across multiple analysis methods and spectral ranges. Something was captured on the photographic plate that wouldn't be visible to the naked eye. Some kind of emission or reflection that affected the silver halide emulsion in a way distinct from ordinary light. A heavy silence falls over the room as the implications of this discovery sink in. The rain outside intensifies, drumming against the windows in an irregular rhythm that seems to underscore the strangeness of what they're witnessing. Could it be some kind of chemical contamination on the plate? Marcus suggests, reaching for rational explanation. Perhaps something in the development process created these artifacts? Possible, but highly improbable, Dr. Chen responds. The pattern is too specific, too organized to be the result of random chemical interaction, and it affects only these 6 subjects while leaving the rest of the plate untouched. She zooms in on where the threads converge. There's a mathematical precision to these connections that defies explanation as mere coincidence or contamination. I found something else, Sophia says finally, pulling out a brittle newspaper from a protective sleeve, her discovery providing a welcome diversion from the unsettling image on the screen. An article from the Boston Herald, dated December 27, 1899, a week after the disappearances. She places it carefully on the table, pointing to a small item relegated to the lower corner of page 8, the placement suggesting it was considered of minimal importance by the editors. She reads aloud, "Strange lights reported in vicinity of Blackwood Estate. Local residents claim unusual celestial phenomena observed over 3 consecutive nights. Authorities attribute sightings to atmospheric conditions and meteorological anomalies common to the season." Dr. Whitlock's expression grows troubled, his academic detachment momentarily giving way to genuine concern. There are accounts from multiple folklore traditions describing lights preceding the disappearance of children, European fairy lore, Native American narratives, even colonial records from the early settlement period, usually dismissed as superstition or post hoc attribution, but the correlation is striking in its persistence across culturally distinct communities. Eleanor stares at the enhanced photograph, at the strange symbols on the wall, at the 6 children with their dilated pupils and subtle hand positions, at the luminous threads connecting them. When she speaks, her voice carries the weight of a conclusion she's reluctant to reach. "I think Margaret Blackwood was involved with the Vigilant Order, and I think she selected these children for a specific purpose. This photograph wasn't just documentation, it was confirmation of their selection." "Based on what criteria?" Marcus asks, his academic skepticism warring with the evidence before them. "What would make these specific children candidates for whatever this was?" Eleanor hesitates, conscious of how her next words will sound to her scientifically minded colleagues. "The Vigilant Order believed certain individuals could perceive what they called the outer spheres, realities beyond our own that existed alongside or intersected with conventional reality. They develop tests to identify such individuals, particularly children, whose minds they considered more receptive to these perceptions before social conditioning and rational education closed them off from such awareness. You're suggesting these orphans were selected because they exhibited some special perceptive ability. Dr. Chen sounds skeptical, her scientific training evident in her resistance to such speculative conclusions. That strays quite far from evidence-based historical analysis, Eleanor. I'm suggesting we need to find out what really happened to them, Eleanor responds, her academic reputation giving weight to her words despite their extraordinary nature. And I think we need to look beyond conventional historical sources to do so. The investigation deepens over subsequent weeks, each researcher contributing their specialized expertise to unraveling the mystery of the 6 missing children. The photograph becomes the center of their inquiry, a window into events that conventional history had overlooked or deliberately obscured. Through persistent archival research and a network of professional contacts, Sophia discovers personal journals belonging to one of the orphanage's teaching staff, Elizabeth Marsh, no relation to the missing Emily Marsh, preserved in a private collection recently donated to the Peabody Essex Museum and digitized as part of their ongoing preservation efforts. The team gathers in the university's conference room, its windowless walls ensuring privacy for discussions that have increasingly strayed beyond conventional academic discourse. The long table is cluttered with documents, reference materials, and the technological tools of modern research: laptops, tablets, specialized scanners. A digital projector casts enlargements of key documents onto the wall screen as Eleanor presents their findings. Elizabeth Marsh worked at Blackwood from 1897 until its closure in 1904, she explains, displaying scanned pages of a leather-bound journal on the projection screen. The handwriting is neat but hurried, suggesting someone writing quickly to capture observations before they faded from memory. She was hired as an educational instructor, tasked with teaching basic literacy and arithmetic to the children. Her journals reveal troubling patterns in the months before the disappearances, patterns that went unreported in the official investigation. She highlights several entries, the words enlarged and enhanced for clarity. April 18, 1899. Thomas drew another of his strange pictures today. When I asked what it represented, he said it was the watchers from the window. The drawing showed nothing I could recognize, just curved lines and shapes that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Margaret confiscated it immediately, as she has with his previous drawings. When I inquired why such harmless creativity should be suppressed, she informed me that Thomas has an unhealthy imagination that requires correction. June 7, 1899. Caught Samuel and Emily whispering together again in the corner of the recreation yard. They stopped when I approached, but I heard Samuel say something about the lights between people. When questioned separately, neither would explain what they meant. Margaret has requested these incidents be reported directly to her rather than noted in the general staff record. I find this irregular, but she is most insistent. August 23, 1899. Catherine complained of headaches again today. When I visited her in the infirmary, she told me she sees threads connecting everyone, but some threads go somewhere else. Dr. Phillips prescribed his usual tonic, which seems to dull her senses considerably. Margaret spent nearly an hour alone with her afterward. Catherine was withdrawn at evening prayers. September 10th, 1899. Margaret has informed us that a photographer will be coming next week for the annual documentation. She has been spending unusual amounts of time with the 6 children she calls specially gifted. They seem increasingly withdrawn from the others, often speaking together in whispers that cease when adults approach. Robert was caught attempting to draw symbols on his dormitory wall, similar to those Thomas was drawing months ago. He received 10 strokes of the cane and no supper. Elizabeth grew increasingly suspicious of Margaret's interest in these specific children. Eleanor continues, scrolling to later entries that show a growing concern in the teacher's observations. But the most revealing entry comes from December 21st, the night of the disappearances. She displays the final relevant entry, the handwriting now shaky and irregular, as though written by someone in a state of extreme distress. December 21st, 1899. I cannot sleep. The sounds from the East Wing were not human. When I attempted to investigate after midnight, Margaret blocked my path in the corridor, wearing a robe embroidered with symbols I had seen in the children's drawings. Through the gap in the door, I saw the children standing in a circle. Their eyes were wrong. Margaret claimed they were merely conducting a Christmas prayer service, but I know what I saw. The walls seemed to bend around them, as though the very structure of the building was distorted. I'm writing this down so that someone might believe me if I am found to be mad tomorrow. The children were chanting in a language I have never heard. Margaret called it the tongue of those who watch. There is no entry for December 22nd. The journal resumes on January 3rd, with Elizabeth noting she had been unwell and confined to bed rest on Margaret's orders, with no memory of the days between her last entry and her recovery. Her handwriting appears shaky, her normally detailed observations reduced to brief, disjointed notes. Drugged, perhaps, Dr. Whitlock suggests, stroking his beard thoughtfully, to prevent her from interfering or witnessing whatever occurred. Laudanum was commonly used in that period and could produce significant memory gaps. It would have been easily accessible to someone in Margaret's position, or psychological trauma, Dr. Chen offers as an alternative explanation. The mind sometimes protects itself by blocking memories too disturbing to process. Marcus has been researching Margaret Blackwood's background, tracking her movements and associations through public records, newspaper accounts, and society pages. "I've found something interesting in her history," he says, bringing up a timeline he's constructed on his tablet. Before establishing the orphanage, Margaret spent 3 years in Europe, from 1874 to 1877, primarily in remote regions of Eastern Europe and the Alpine countries. Her passport applications and ship manifests show travel to areas that wouldn't be typical for American tourists of that era: remote villages in the Carpathian Mountains, isolated communities in the Black Forest, extended stays in parts of Bavaria associated with esoteric practices. He scrolls through scanned documents as he continues. Several locations she visited were associated with obscure mystical traditions, the kind that persisted in isolated communities despite the influence of mainstream Christianity. What's particularly interesting is that she traveled alone, highly unusual for a woman of her social position in that period. And she returned to America with numerous crates of personal effects that customs officials noted contained books and artifacts of a scholarly nature. Dr. Chen has been conferring with colleagues in various scientific fields about the anomalies discovered in the photograph. She projects a new analysis on the screen, one that maps the patterns of the luminous threads to known mathematical models. I've consulted with Dr. Ramirez in theoretical physics and Dr. Kaplan in comparative mythology about these symbols we found on the wall. When mapped mathematically, they appear to form what Ramirez calls a topological singularity, a theoretical point where conventional spatial relationships break down. Similar patterns appear in several esoteric traditions, consistently associated with concepts of doorways or thresholds. Between worlds, Dr. Whitlock adds quietly, his academic knowledge aligning with the evidence before them. The positioning of the symbols creates a mathematically precise arrangement that appears in mystical traditions from Babylon to Tibet, always associated with transition points between different states of reality or consciousness. Sophia spreads out a series of maps on the table, their edges overlapping to create a composite view of the region surrounding the Blackwood orphanage. Red pins mark specific locations, connected by a length of red thread that creates a distinctive pattern across the landscape. I've been tracking unusual incidents reported in the region around Blackwood during that period. There's a pattern that becomes evident when the events are mapped geographically. She indicates several locations, each marked with dates and brief notations. Local newspapers reported strange lights, unexplained sounds, and unusual animal behavior along this line, leading from the orphanage into the deepest part of the forest. The incidents begin in April 1899, when Elizabeth first notes Thomas's strange drawings, and increase in frequency until December. Eleanor stands before the evidence they've gathered, her expression grave as she attempts to synthesize their discoveries into a coherent narrative. The wall behind her is covered with enlarged photographs, maps, timelines, and transcribed journal entries, a visual representation of their collective research that resembles the investigation boards used by police detectives. I believe Margaret Blackwood selected these children because they exhibited unusual perceptive abilities, what the Vigilant Order would have considered sensitivity to the outer spheres. She points to Elizabeth Marsh's journal entries. The children were seeing things others couldn't: watchers, threads connecting people, visual phenomena that manifested in their drawings. The photograph was part of the process, a way of confirming their selection through whatever technique is creating these luminous connections we can now see with spectral analysis. And the disappearance? Marcus asks. voicing the question that has driven their investigation from the beginning. What happened to them on December 21st? I don't think they ran away or were abducted in the conventional sense, Eleanor says carefully, aware of how her conclusion will sound even to colleagues who have followed the evidence this far. I think Margaret conducted some kind of ritual on the winter solstice, December 21st, attempting to use the children's unique perceptive abilities to create an opening to whatever realm the vigilant order was trying to access. Dr. Chen looks skeptical, her scientific training rebelling against such an extraordinary conclusion, despite the anomalous evidence she herself has documented. That's a significant leap from historical analysis to something else entirely, something outside the realm of academic inquiry, which is why we need to visit the site. Eleanor responds, her determination evident. The Blackwood property still exists. It's abandoned. The orphanage closed in 1904 after financial difficulties, according to official records, but the structures remain. If there's physical evidence to support or refute this theory, we'll find it there. She pauses, looking at each of her colleagues in turn. I understand if any of you wish to distance yourselves from this phase of the investigation. It goes beyond conventional academic research, and there could be professional consequences for pursuing such an unorthodox theory. There is a moment of silence as each considers the implications. Their academic reputations, built on years of rigorous scholarship and peer-reviewed publications, could be jeopardized by association with research that strayed into territory more commonly associated with paranormal investigators than university professors. I've documented anomalies I cannot explain through conventional scientific frameworks, Dr. Chen says finally. As a scientist, I'm obligated to investigate further, regardless of where that investigation leads. The historical evidence is compelling, Marcus adds. Even if we find a completely rational explanation, documenting the site is standard archaeological practice. Dr. Whitlock nods his agreement. Folk beliefs often contain kernels of historical truth, encoded in symbolic language. At minimum, we're uncovering a fascinating case study in late Victorian esoteric practices. Sophia is the last to speak. These children deserve to have their story told, whatever that story may be. Official records failed them once. I won't be part of a second failure. The decision made, they begin preparations for an expedition to the Blackwood property, securing necessary permits and equipment for what they publicly describe as an architectural and historical documentation of a significant period structure. Privately, they prepare for something else entirely. An investigation into phenomena that defies conventional historical explanation. A week later, the research team arrives at what remains of Blackwood Orphanage. The journey takes them along winding country roads that gradually deteriorate as they move deeper into the Massachusetts countryside. The final approach is along a gravel drive nearly reclaimed by nature, tree branches scraping against their vehicles as they navigate the overgrown path. The GPS signal fades intermittently, forcing them to rely on Sophia's meticulously researched directions. The main building stands in dilapidated grandeur, its Victorian architecture crumbling but still imposing against the gray autumn sky. Gothic revival elements, pointed arches, ornate carvings, decorative buttresses, lend the structure an ecclesiastical appearance more reminiscent of a church than a children's home. Surrounding forest has encroached over the decades, with young trees growing through what was once a carefully maintained lawn. Nature is slowly reclaiming the site, but the process seems somehow incomplete, as though something about the building resists the natural cycle of decay. Dr. Whitlock consults a property map from 1900 that Sophia had located in county records. The east wing would be on this side, he says, pointing to their right, where an extension of the main building stretches into what is now dense woodland, where Elizabeth Marsh heard the disturbances on the night of December 21st. They've come prepared with proper equipment, protective gear for exploring deteriorated structures, high-powered lights, digital cameras with various specialized lenses, scientific instruments for measuring environmental conditions, and communications devices to maintain contact in the sprawling building. Dr. Chen carries specialized imaging equipment similar to that used in their laboratory analysis, while Marcus documents their exploration with high-definition video. Eleanor has brought copies of the original floor plans, obtained from county archives, to guide their exploration. The interior of the orphanage is a study in elegant decay, grand staircases with missing steps, faded wallpaper peeling from damp walls, ornate plasterwork crumbling from ceilings, remnants of Victorian furniture covered in decades of dust and debris. Sunlight filters through broken windows, casting long shadows across rooms once filled with the sounds of children. The floors creak beneath their careful steps, the building seeming to acknowledge their presence with subtle sounds of settling timber. "The east wing should be through here," Eleanor says, consulting the floor plan as they navigate the deteriorating corridors. The hallway narrows as they approach a section of the building that appears structurally distinct from the main house. According to the plans, this was originally built as a chapel before being converted to additional dormitory space when the orphanage expanded in 1885. The door to the east wing is unlike the others they've encountered, heavier, reinforced with iron bands, and remarkably well preserved despite the surrounding decay. While other wooden elements show extensive rot and insect damage, this door remains solid, its metal components free from the rust that affects similar features throughout the building. "This doesn't match the architectural style of the rest of the building," Sophia observes, running her hand along the iron reinforcements. "It looks more like a security door than something decorative, and the preservation state is anomalous compared to everything else we've seen." With considerable effort, they manage to open it, the hinges protesting with a sound that echoes through the empty corridors like a moan. Beyond lies a long corridor ending in a circular chamber. The corridor's walls are lined with what would have been dormitory rooms, their doors hanging askew or missing entirely. The space is beyond empty save for the metal frames of institutional beds. As they approach the chamber at the corridor's end, their lights illuminate a space that immediately strikes them as different from the rest of the orphanage. The circular room, approximately 30 feet in diameter, has no windows and only the single entrance through which they've entered. The ceiling rises to a dome, creating unusual acoustics that cause even their whispers to resonate strangely. Most striking, however, is the state of preservation. While the rest of the building shows the expected deterioration of a structure abandoned for over a century, this chamber is perfectly preserved, as though time stopped here a century ago. No dust covers the floor, no decay affects the walls. The plaster remains intact, the wooden moldings unaffected by rot or insects. And on those walls, clearly visible in the beams of their flashlights, are the same symbols they discovered in the enhanced photograph, but here rendered in meticulous detail, covering every available surface from floor to ceiling in concentric rings of increasing complexity. "It's some kind of ritual space," Dr. Whitlock whispers, his expertise in folklore making the patterns recognizable despite their obscurity, designed to focus energy toward the center. The arrangement follows principles found in multiple esoteric traditions. Sacred geometry, intended to create what practitioners would call a thin place, where different planes of existence might intersect. In the center stands a circular platform, raised slightly from the floor and approximately 6 feet in diameter. Its surface is smooth stone, unlike the wooden flooring of the rest of the chamber, with 6 indentations marking its circumference, evenly spaced like points on a compass, but numbering 6 instead of 4, for the children to stand, Eleanor says softly, the realization dawning with chilling clarity. Positioned precisely to form the points of a hexagram, Dr. Chen sets up her equipment, conducting readings of the chamber with instruments designed to measure various environmental factors: temperature, humidity, electromagnetic radiation, air composition. "The electromagnetic patterns here are unusual," she reports, studying the readings with growing confusion. "There are fluctuations that don't correspond to any known natural or electrical source. The pattern resembles quantum fluctuations, but at a macro scale that shouldn't be possible according to conventional physics. Marcus has been filming meticulously, documenting every symbol, every unusual feature of the chamber. Look at this," he says suddenly, pointing to a small cabinet built into the wall, nearly invisible behind an ornate wooden panel that blends with the surrounding molding. Inside, they discover a leather-bound volume, Margaret Blackwood's personal journal, preserved in the unnaturally maintained environment of the chamber. Its pages remain supple, the ink unfaded despite the passage of time. Unlike Elizabeth Marsh's observations, this journal contains detailed documentation of Margaret's work with the 6 children, notes on their special qualities, and increasingly fervent writings about the imminent convergence she anticipated. The entries begin in April 1899, when she first identified Thomas as having the sight, and continue through the subsequent months as she gathered the other 5 children who demonstrated similar abilities. The journal details tests she conducted to confirm their perceptive capabilities, exercises designed to strengthen what she called their extrasensory acuity, and preparations for what she termed the opening. The final entry, dated December 21st, 1899, reads, "The preparations are complete. The children have been prepared through fasting and meditation as prescribed in the ancient texts. Their abilities have manifested precisely as the order predicted. They see the threads between worlds, perceive the watchers, hear the harmonies beyond ordinary sound. Tonight, the winter solstice aligns with the celestial configuration described in the ancient texts. The threshold will open. The children will serve as anchors for the crossing. I will witness what no human has seen for millennia. Glory to the vigilant eye that sees beyond the veil. There is no further entry." She believed these children could perceive things others couldn't, Eleanor says, carefully examining the journal, and she was using them as conduits for something, a doorway between realities. Dr. Chen's equipment suddenly emits a series of rapid beeps, the sound unnaturally loud in the chamber's perfect acoustics. "There's a significant electromagnetic anomaly forming," she says, checking her readings with growing concern. "It's centered on the platform and increasing in intensity. I've never seen patterns like this outside of theoretical models." The team watches in astonishment as faint, luminous threads, identical to those they observed in the enhanced photograph, begin to materialize in the air above the platform. They waver like gossamer in an unfelt breeze, growing stronger by the moment, their blue-white luminescence casting eerie shadows across the symbol-covered walls. It's December 21st. Sophia realizes, checking her phone with an expression of growing alarm. The winter solstice, exactly 126 years later to the day. The threads continue to strengthen, weaving together into a complex pattern that hovers above the platform. Within this shimmering web, vague forms begin to take shape, silhouettes that might be human but somehow distorted, elongated in ways that defy anatomical possibility, their proportions suggesting bodies that evolved under different physical laws. "We need to leave," Dr. Whitlock urges, backing toward the door, his academic curiosity overcome by primal warning instincts. Now, as the team retreats, Marcus continues filming, unable to tear himself away from the unfolding phenomenon despite his colleagues' warnings. Through his camera's viewfinder, he sees something the others don't. 6 small figures standing on the platform, their forms translucent but recognizable from the photograph. The missing children, frozen in time, their eyes now completely black, staring directly into the camera as though aware of being observed across the gulf of centuries. The footage would later show only electromagnetic distortion, a whirling pattern of light and shadow that defied analysis, but Marcus knows what he saw. The image burned into his memory with the clarity of direct experience. Outside, in the safety of daylight, the team attempts to process what they witnessed. They stand in a loose circle near their vehicles, each struggling to reconcile their academic training with the inexplicable phenomena they've encountered. The orphanage looms behind them, its ordinary decay now seeming like camouflage for something far stranger hidden within its walls. "The children never left," Eleanor says finally, giving voice to the conclusion forming in all their minds. Whatever ritual Margaret performed, it didn't transport them anywhere physically. It trapped them, suspended between states of existence, anchored to that chamber. "That's not scientifically possible," Dr. Chen objects, though her voice lacks conviction after what they've seen. "No known physics can explain a persistent quantum state maintaining coherence for over a century, especially involving macro-scale biological organisms." "Science has limits," Dr. Whitlock responds quietly, his academic knowledge of folklore suddenly carrying new weight. "Every culture worldwide contains accounts of liminal spaces where conventional physics doesn't apply. Doorways, thresholds, crossroads where different realities intersect." Sophia has been examining digital copies of Margaret's journal on her tablet, searching for passages that might explain what they've witnessed. Listen to this passage from October. "The Order believes that those who can perceive the outer spheres may serve as bridges. Their unique sensitivities allow them to exist simultaneously in multiple states, creating permanent pathways between realms. Through them, communication becomes possible. Through them, visitation becomes possible." She wasn't trying to send them somewhere, Marcus realizes. She was trying to use them as doors. "Doors that open both ways," Eleanor adds, her expression grim. "The children were meant to allow something else to come through." Dr. Chen reviews the readings from her equipment. "The energy patterns in that chamber don't match anything in our scientific understanding. There are quantum fluctuations that shouldn't be stable, yet they persist." "What happened to Margaret Blackwood?" Marcus asks. If she was there during the ritual, why was there no record of her disappearance? Sophia consults her notes. According to official records, Margaret continued running the orphanage until 1904, when it closed due to financial difficulties. She then apparently retired to a private residence and died in 1912. But her journal ends on December 21, 1899. Eleanor points out, there are no further entries. Dr. Whitlock's expression darkens. What if whatever returned from the other side wasn't the children? A chilling silence falls over the group. The photograph, Eleanor says suddenly. We need to re-examine it with what we know now. Back at the university 2 days later, Dr. Chen applies new analytical techniques to the original photograph, informed by the electromagnetic readings taken at the orphanage. I'm adjusting the spectral analysis to match the specific frequency patterns we recorded in the chamber, she explains, as the team watches the image transform on her monitor. The photograph changes subtly but significantly. The 6 children who would disappear now appear slightly different from the others, not in any obvious physical way, but in some quality difficult to define. They seem more present, more substantial than their peers, as though they alone are fully there while everything else is slightly less real. But the most disturbing change appears in the figure of Margaret Blackwood. Where before stood a severe Victorian matron, the enhanced image now reveals something else entirely. Her outline remains, but within it, visible only through this specialized analysis, is a form that isn't human, a collection of angles and proportions that violate anatomical possibility, constrained within a human silhouette like a hand forced into a glove too small. Whatever came through, Eleanor whispers, it took her place. Marcus points to the other children in the photograph, the ones who weren't part of the ritual. What happened to them? Sophia has been researching this question. Records show increased mortality at Blackwood after December 1899. 14 children died of various illnesses over the next 5 years, an unusually high rate even for that period. The survivors were eventually transferred to other institutions when Blackwood closed. It was feeding, Dr. Whitlock suggests grimly. Gradually, carefully, to avoid suspicion, Dr. Chen interrupts, pointing to her screen. There's something else in the photograph. Look at the windows. She zooms in on the orphanage windows visible in the background. Enhanced and filtered, the glass shows not reflections, but faces, dozens of them, pressed against the panes from inside, distorted in expressions of silent horror. Previous occupants, Eleanor suggests. How many children passed through Blackwood before our 6 were selected? How many might have fallen victim to whatever entity Margaret was serving? The Vigilant Order, Marcus recalls. They called themselves Watchers. Well, what if they weren't watching for something but being watched by something? Dr. Whitlock nods slowly. Many ancient traditions describe entities that observe humanity from beyond perceived reality, seeking entry points. And Margaret found a way to provide one, Eleanor concludes, using children whose perceptive abilities made them suitable conduits. Dr. Chen has been quiet, staring at her readings. The energy pattern we recorded at the orphanage, it's still active, and according to these measurements, it's growing stronger. The door is still open, Sophia realizes, has been for 126 years, and widening, Eleanor adds. The winter solstice triggered some kind of resonance, amplifying the effect. Marcus looks troubled. If the entity that replaced Margaret eventually died in 1912, what happened to it? Did it return to wherever it came from, or did it find another host? Dr. Whitlock completes the thought. Perhaps many, over the decades. Eleanor stares at the photograph, at the not quite human figure of Margaret Blackwood standing behind the children. We need to seal that doorway. The chamber has preserved the connection for all these years. If we disrupt the symbols, break the circle, that would require returning to Blackwood, Sophia points out, to a location we now know contains an active paranormal phenomenon. The alternative is leaving a widening doorway for entities to continue crossing through, Eleanor counters, using those children as permanent conduits. Dr. Chen, the most scientifically minded of the group, has been struggling with what they've discovered. I can't explain what we've seen within conventional scientific parameters, she admits, but I can measure it, document it, and if disrupting that chamber might help those children, the decision is made. The team will return to Blackwood, equipped with what they need to dismantle the ritual space and hopefully free the children trapped in their century-long limbo. 2 days later, they arrive at the orphanage as dusk approaches. The structure seems different somehow, more solid, more present in the landscape. as though it's regaining substance with the growing strength of the connection. They make their way through the decaying corridors toward the east wing. The door, which had required significant effort to open during their previous visit, now swings open at the lightest touch. The circular chamber beyond glows with faint pulsing light emanating from the symbols on the walls. The platform at the center now clearly shows 6 ghostly figures, the missing children, standing in the same positions they occupied in the photograph, their expressions blank, their eyes entirely black. "They're manifesting more fully," Dr. Whitlock observes, his voice hushed. "The connection is strengthening." Dr. Chen sets up specialized equipment designed to disrupt the electromagnetic patterns they recorded previously. Eleanor carries Margaret's journal, which contains detailed descriptions of how the ritual space was created. According to her notes, the symbols must remain unbroken for the connection to maintain stability, Eleanor explains, examining the glowing marks on the walls. "If we damage them in specific places, it should collapse the entire structure." Sophia and Marcus begin carefully removing sections of the wall where key symbols are located, following Eleanor's guidance. As each symbol is broken, a high-pitched sound fills the air, just at the threshold of human hearing. The ghostly forms of the children become more distinct as the team works, as though they're gradually pushing through from whatever state of existence has held them for over a century. Their expressions change from blank to distressed, silent mouths opening in what might be warnings. "Something's happening," Dr. Chen says, checking her instruments. The electromagnetic readings are spiking. The air in the chamber thickens, becoming difficult to breathe. Shadows gather in the corners, moving against the light rather than with it. "We need to hurry," Dr. Whitlock urges. "I think we're not just closing the door, we're disturbing whatever has been coming through it." As they damage the final critical symbols, the platform at the center begins to crack. The ghostly children look directly at the team, their expressions now revealing a century of awareness and suffering. The smallest child, Sarah, speaks, her voice somehow both distant and immediately present. "She's still here. She never left." The shadows in the corners surge forward, coalescing into a towering form that only vaguely resembles the human shape of Margaret Blackwood. It moves with impossible fluidity, its proportions constantly shifting. "Get out!" Eleanor shouts as the entity advances. The connection is collapsing. The team rushes toward the door as the chamber begins to disintegrate around them, not crumbling physically, but seeming to fold inward, as though space itself is contracting. The ghostly children remain on the platform, their forms growing brighter as the shadows retreat from them. In the final moment before the team escapes through the door, Eleanor looks back. The 6 children stand hand in hand, their expressions peaceful for the first time, as light engulfs them. The entity that was once Margaret Blackwood writhes against this light, its form unraveling. The door slams shut behind them as they flee the building, which now seems to be imploding, not with physical destruction, but with a strange inverted pressure, as though something is being pulled back through a closing aperture. By the time they reach the safety of their vehicles, the orphanage appears normal again, just an abandoned Victorian building slowly succumbing to time and nature. But they know it has changed fundamentally. Dr. Chen's instruments confirm it. The electromagnetic anomalies have ceased. The connection has been severed. In the days that follow, the team works to understand what they experienced and document it as thoroughly as possible. Though they know much of what occurred defies conventional explanation. The photograph that started their investigation has changed. When they examine it again, the 6 children who disappeared are simply gone from the image, not edited out, but absent as though they were never captured by the camera. Margaret Blackwood's figure is similarly absent, leaving only the remaining orphans and staff members, standing with a noticeable gap in their arrangement. "They're free," Eleanor concludes. "Whatever state of suspension trapped them for all these years has been broken." "And the entity?" Sophia asks. "Pulled back," Dr. Whitlock suggests. "When we disrupted the connection, it lost its anchor to our reality." Marcus has been researching historical records following their discoveries. "I found something interesting. After Blackwood Orphanage closed in 1904, there were similar institutions established in various locations across New England, all founded by individuals connected to Margaret Blackwood's social circle. The Vigilant Order continued its work, Eleanor realizes, seeking other children with the same perceptive abilities. But without their primary gateway, Dr. Chen adds, "We've closed one door, but there may be others." The team publishes their findings in an obscure academic journal, carefully framed as a historical investigation into unusual institutional practices of the late Victorian era. The paranormal elements are documented separately, secured in the university's restricted archives. The photograph that started it all remains in Eleanor's office, now showing only 17 children instead of 23, with a conspicuous absence where Margaret once stood. Only those who know what to look for would notice anything unusual about it. Sometimes when working late, Eleanor glances at the photograph and could swear she sees, just for a moment, 6 children standing behind the glass of her office window, their expressions peaceful before they fade from sight. In her notes, which will one day join the university archives, she writes, "They were chosen because they could see beyond the veil of ordinary perception. Their curse became their salvation. They saw the threads between worlds, and finally, after a century of serving as unwilling doorways, they followed those threads home. The orphanage still stands, slowly reclaimed by nature. Local residents avoid it without knowing exactly why. Children occasionally claim to see 6 figures playing among the trees nearby, always just at dusk, always just out of clear sight. The chamber in the east wing has collapsed, its walls crumbled inward as though crushed by enormous pressure. The symbols are gone, their power broken, but deep in the foundation, in the stone itself, a faint pulse remains, dormant now, but waiting. For stone remembers what humans forget, and some doorways, once opened, can never be fully closed." And in archives and historical societies across the world, researchers continue to discover old photographs, groups of solemn-faced children from bygone eras standing before various institutions. Most pass unnoticed, unremarkable records of the past, but occasionally someone might look closely at the children's eyes, at their carefully positioned hands, at the barely visible symbols etched on walls behind them. Someone might wonder about the threads connecting certain children, visible only under specific analysis. Someone might question what became of these particular children, and why records of them seem to vanish at certain points. And somewhere, watching from just beyond the threshold of perception, entities wait for another doorway to open.